Welcome to Amadon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amadon. Thank you for joining me in this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 117 of the podcast is Joe Jackson, Instructional Assistant Professor of Musical Theater Dance here at the University of Mississippi. Ever since I met Joe, I've wanted to have him on the podcast. One, he's from theater, so his voice sounds fantastic, right? He knows how to project. He knows how to have intonation. Also, he's got amazing stories. And additionally, he's got a perspective on teaching that differs from my own. And when learning how to teach better, I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a bunch of different perspectives, and that's what I love to put on the podcast, whether it's talking to Andy Weir and thinking about problem solving when he's writing a book, The Martian, whether it's talking to Rob Harvilla when he's talking about, what is he teaching us about the 90s with his podcast, 60 Songs That Explain the 90s, whether it's Joe when he's talking about how do you teach a choreography routine and dealing with a director and in a big production like Oklahoma, which I saw this past summer, which was fantastic, which it starred, he was in one of the lead roles along with his wife, Amy Jackson, who's also at the University of Mississippi as in the Department of Teacher Education. So it's a great conversation. I'm glad I get to share it. They have a production coming up at the time of the release of this podcast. It might be the day of or the next day, and the tickets might be sold out. So I'm sorry, but guess what? Joe's going to have more productions coming up on the University of Mississippi campus and maybe somewhere in a theater near you. So pay attention. So without further delay, here's my conversation with Joe Jackson. Joe Jackson, welcome to Amadon Planet. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Happy Halloween.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know if we were actually talking about Halloween.
Sure.
I mean,
like it'll be released a little bit later, but hey, it is Halloween.
Absolutely.
So we've had, and I'll say this, before we get too far into it, like you're one of those people that even though we haven't had that many conversations, every time we've had a good conversation, I'm like, that guy's a friend, you know. He's in the circle, you know.
Thanks, man. Yeah, my wife obviously is a fellow educator here in the School of Education, and first time meeting you, she came home and she's like, Joe, you've got to meet this guy Joel. He is awesome. You guys would totally get along. And I'm like, all right, cool. So yeah.
And so it's like, and I always kind of joke. There's been a few people in my life that's come around. Like Katie's like my wife. She's like, yeah, that's going in the, hey, that's my best friend Joe. That's fantastic. So and it's cool that we had a chance to interact, and then over the summer and you or in the early spring graduation time, and knew that you were doing Oklahoma with your lovely wife.
Absolutely.
And so I saw Oklahoma this past summer.
Yeah.
And you choreographed. Did you direct?
No, Renee Pulliam was the director, and I choreographed and then was in the show as Will Parker.
Do you direct the choreography, though?
So that's a great question. Actually, yeah, there's typically on musicals, you have your main director who's focusing on the overall concept of the show, will block the staging of the scenes, and then usually a choreographer will step in, and it's almost like a good choreographer and directing team will like tap out, right? They kind of know when it's the other person's responsibility, and so finding that sort of balance, and that trade-off is really tricky. But a good team knows when to kind of step back and hand the reins over.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of directors that are choreographers, right? Across Broadway's history, some of the best have been director choreographers. Think of Bob Fosse, Jerome Robbins, Susan Stroman, Jerry Mitchell. There's a lot of famous directors and choreographers that have won Tony Awards, and I think some of the benefit to that is there's only one cook. You can have a lot of people in the kitchen working, but ultimately there's one chef who's putting it all together. And so it can be very, very beneficial to have that. But in a spirit of collaboration, theater is a very collaborative environment, from the various designers to actors. If you find the right team, you find the right people that gel and work well together, it can also be a very successful production.
Yeah. So okay, this is great.
Yeah,
this is perfect. And so again, you said you played one of the main roles. You played Will Parker.
Yep.
And my question to start this, and I gave you my questions, is how did you do that? like that you're in.
How did I do both?
Your first, how did you, and how did you do that? And so that's my main question.
Sure.
We'll get to that in a second. But first, I think let's give a little background to who Joe Jackson is.
Oh, thanks.
How did you get to your current role here at the University of Mississippi?
Do we have time? No.
I know it's long. But it's interesting, and I think that's what led to our kind of like I was just fascinated by the story.
So I'll give you the sort of Sports Center version, which my wife I tell long stories, so my wife's like Sports Center version. Let's go. So here's the da 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 da. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Grew up playing sports. Was interested in theater. And then didn't actually do theater until high school. And coming out of, or actually my senior year, I decided I think I want to pursue this because I was actually a math and science kid. I was already accepted to Georgia Tech. I was going to be an electrical engineer, and at the last minute, sort of said, "Wait a minute, I think I want to do something different." So started looking at colleges, the last few months of senior year. Chose Ole Miss actually. So I came here for my undergrad, got a BFA in musical theater. Great 4 years here in Oxford, and then went to New York to pursue Broadway dreams, right? As so many actors do. Was after non-equity tours and things where I actually met my wife, met Amy. Became an equity actor, which is the union for actors. So was able to join the union, had some great success working around the country as a union actor.
And that's a big deal. I mean, I didn't want to
No, you're good.
How much you talked about that transition was a big deal.
It is. It's sort of what opens that door to not only higher pay but just being having a lot of union protection, right? Because Amy and I met doing non-equity, what's called bus and truck tours, and it's like what comes through here in Oxford, at the Ford Center. And the schedule for those things are crazy. Like you're literally on a bus for, 4 to 6 hours a day. You're traveling several hundred miles, and you're sleeping on the bus on a lot of mornings at least. And then you pull into the theater that afternoon. You do the show, you go to a hotel that night, you wake up the next morning, do it all again in a different city. And so it's a grind. And so, that's that non-equity life. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to become an equity actor, right? With the pinnacle being Broadway. That's the best, those are the best contracts, those are the highest paying and the most, obviously, most well known. But there's equity actors like in most major cities around that have, big theater companies and things. And then the big equity tours, like the ones that come through Memphis and play the Orpheum, those are equity tours. So getting my equity card was huge. And then shortly after that, we started a family, and we moved to Philly, where both of our boys were born in downtown Philly at UPenn while I was doing shows. So I was working at the Walnut Street Theater and, the Fulton Theater, which is just outside of Philly. And so was getting a lot of great equity work, great union work. And then after our second son was born, we realized, wow, we need some help, as you can imagine, with two kids under the age of 2. So my wife is from Pittsburgh, so we moved to Pittsburgh, thinking this is just a short-term kind of thing. And I wound up realizing how much theater and how much art is in Pittsburgh. I was really pretty shocked. So I hadn't been in the city that long, just visiting, Amy's parents and things. And Pittsburgh has a great theater scene. It's still kind of a smaller city compared to Atlanta, Nashville, Chicago, of course. But it wound up being really great for me as an artist. I was working at the Pittsburgh CLO and Pittsburgh Public Theater, and then was able to get into education. And so that's kind of what really turned the corner for me. Because as an actor, as a starving artist, as you might say. You're always looking for that next gig. You're always counting the number of weeks that you work in a year, because you have to work a certain number of weeks to qualify for insurance. Yeah. And it's not something you think about when you're a teenager wanting to pursue a Broadway career, but once you're in it, you're like, wow, this is a lot of work, And so it when the opportunity came up to teach, I was hesitant, but then I realized, what? I've had great success. It's time for me to help pass that along. And while I was teaching, I've still been able to pursue. I've still been able to be in shows, still been able to now direct and choreograph, because up to that point, I hadn't really been on the other side of the table, so to speak, right? I'd always been the one going into an audition, looking for work as an actor. And starting to be a teacher, I realized, wow, there's a whole other side of this business that I didn't have a lot of experience with. So while I was teaching in Pittsburgh, I went back to grad school, got my master's in directing. Actually, I did a summer program in Chicago at Roosevelt University, and that just provided me with the education, but also the confidence and the knowledge to say, yes, I can do this on a higher level. So around that same time, I started looking for, some university gigs. I loved the school that I was at. It was like a small private school, similar to Regents. Mm-hmm. Here in Oxford, but I was in the Pittsburgh area, and they were wonderful. The school was so supportive, but at the same time, I knew that I felt like I had a higher calling, right? Yeah. I felt like, while it was great to work with these, 1st through 12th graders and, doing their school shows, only maybe 1 out of every 2 graduating classes, kids would actually pursue theater in college. Yeah. And I think that was a big wake-up call for me to say, you know what, I think I'm ready to work with a more dedicated actor, a more dedicated student that wants to do this as a career. And so I started looking at college jobs, and randomly, I think actually my wife was the one who first showed it to me, that there was a position at the University of Mississippi here, and for a professor of musical theater. Yeah. So I applied, and the original position I applied for was a tenure track, but since I don't have a terminal degree, they actually said, hey, we think you'd be right for this position. So I'm an instructional assistant professor of musical theater dance, which I tell everyone that's the longest title ever. It really, it should be my name and then 3 letters, F-U-N. I have fun. I feel like I'm the luckiest guy on campus because I get to dance all day. Yeah. And it's like who wouldn't love that, right? And so I think I hope my classes are fun. I try to bring joy to all of them while we're still learning and striving for not perfection by any means, but striving for growth. Right? Yeah. I think that's the big thing that I encourage in our classes. And so while I'm here, I teach 3 classes a semester in dance, but then I also get to choreograph our musicals. Yeah. So that's kind of the long story.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's
it was not too Sports Center. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, there is some things in there. So like you talked about in my experience, like when I was in high school, like I had a chance to do sports, and there were some of the guys I did sports with who were also in the show choir. Yeah. And I was so impressed, like, knowing how like athletic they were on the basketball court. Like I think about my friend, he was the coach's son, and he was like awesome in the show choir, and then he'd come on, like, that was on Saturday night, Friday nights, he'd be on the basketball court. Yeah. How did you get introduced to dance? Like
great question.
Because like and I'm just thinking like I think I missed out on opportunities because like I didn't step into those spaces like theater and speech and debate, some other like kind of more performance oriented things. Yeah. And I wish I would have. And I see my son did that here. Oxford has a great theater program. Yeah. And I just see the confidence that gave him. I don't know. So, like, how did you get interested into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, to be honest, like, I think that is a common question that people in the arts, especially theater, are always trying to ask themselves. They're always trying to figure out how can we bridge that gap. Yeah. At the school that I taught at in Pittsburgh, there's this famous story of the previous musical theater director, the director of theater. Excuse me. He was known for these moments where he would literally look around in his cast and say, I need more guys, right? All these girls are here. I love all you girls, but, I need more guys. Yeah. And so he was famous for walking out onto the soccer field at practice and literally saying, you, rehearsal tomorrow. Yeah. Now, that could be like an exaggerated story, but he apparently was big on just going into practices and talking to the coaches, talking to the students, saying like, come and do our shows. Right. And they would come. Yeah. I had a similar experience actually. One of my last shows back at my school in Pittsburgh, where we were doing Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, wonderful show, one of the best stories, and just it's so meaningful in so many ways. And we had a great cast, but part of the dynamic in the show is that you've got these group of Russians that the Jewish community is feeling ostracized, right? The group of Russians are trying to force them out. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very small role, but they needed to be menacing. They needed to be like larger, right? At least, if possible. And they had to dance because there's this whole scene in a tavern called, L'Chaim to Life, where, Tevye is dancing with the Russians. And at first it's like you don't know if they're going to fight, but then they wind up celebrating their commonality. And it's a beautiful moment. So I went to some seniors at the time that I knew had done theater earlier, like in middle school.
Yeah.
And I was like, and they were on the basketball team. I was like, hey guys, what do you think? Let's talk. And so they wound up, or no, maybe it was a soccer team. Anyway, so they had like some time in their schedule that they could devote like 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
And we brought them in. We taught them all this like amazing like Russian dancing.
Yeah.
And then they did the show, and it was amazing. It was a great bridge and a great way to bring those two communities together.
Yeah.
So that's always the challenge. For me personally, I know that going back to your original question, I grew up playing sports. I was a baseball and basketball kid. I was too small to play football, but it really was in middle school. I was still too small where all my friends started growing, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like standing at the plate in like rec baseball and like pitches coming in at like 80, 90 miles per hour. And I was just like, nope, I think I've run my course on this.
Yeah.
I didn't hit my growth spurt until like 10th grade. And, but before then I needed something to do. And all of my friends were chorus kids or band kids and started doing theater. And so that was when I sort of bridged the gap. Yeah. So I started doing theater in high school, but our shows in high school were just, a lot of plays, and then our musicals would be the dancing in them was very pedestrian, right? It was very much like, just step touch, right? There wasn't any sophisticated dancing because none of us really danced. There were a few of the girls maybe had some dance training. So oddly enough, it wasn't until I got here at the University of Mississippi where I took my first official dance class. It was freshman year. I remember it was at the time Jennifer Mazinko was
Holy
here.
Cow, Joe.
Jennifer Mazinko was our modern teacher and contemporary teacher, and freshman year, I think we all had to take modern dance our like spring semester. Mm-hmm. So that was my first dance class. And I remember being like, this is weird. We're rolling around on the floor and we're doing all these contractions and things. And then the next year I said, okay, I think I want to, take more styles. So I took a ballet class, I took a tap class, fell in love with tap for sure. Took the theater dance classes, and that was my dance training. That was where I started. Yeah. And so I still teach Renee Pulliam, who's our tap teacher and theater dance teacher back when I was here. She's still around. She still teaches tap. And I see her every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so then when I got to New York, I realized I've just scratched the surface, right? Yeah. I've been able to get by with my athleticism from sports, but I didn't have the training. I didn't have the fundamental like knowledge of terminology and just all the details that you need as a dancer that I should have gotten when I was much younger. So when I got to New York, I was still taking dance classes and still trying to improve myself as much as possible.
Because you're probably late in the game compared to everyone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What everybody's like.
Well, there's still times in class where, I'll go to do something. And again, because like kinesthetically, like my body just like moves. I'm bragging a little bit, I guess, but my body just moves well, right? I can watch somebody do something and go, okay, cool, I got that. But you ask me what to call it. Sometimes I have no idea. I have to turn to like a girl that I know has been dancing
do
since
the flippy
she was
hand,
5. Exactly. I'm like, it's the twisty spinny thing. And they're like, that's a chaîné, chasse chaîné turn. I'm like, there we go. Yeah. Fouette, I'm like, So sometimes the terminology is not quite on the forefront of my brain. Yeah. Because it was something that I've been trying to learn later in life.
Right.
So as an educator, that's something that, I'm sure there's moments for you as an educator where you come out of a class or you're maybe in the middle of a class, you're like, I'm not quite nailing this moment, right?
Yeah.
That's when I have the most frustration as an educator is moments where I feel like I'm not as prepared. I'm not as on the ball with like some of the terminology as I should be. But then I understand but I give myself a little grace, right?
Yeah.
Take a breath and I go, you know what? I'm here, I'm doing this for these students, and they are learning.
Yeah.
I can't make it about me and my deficits, right?
Yeah.
I need to be able to I need to focus on what am I able to bring to them, right?
Yeah.
How can I help them learn this term that I'm still messing up?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, what a teachable moment. Like, hey, here's they know it. Your fellow student knows it. So it's like we are all learning together. Like that's a great environment to create within a classroom.
Yeah.
So again, going back to the how do you do it. So thinking about teaching a class, okay, and teaching, but like choreography and looking at, and again, going back to my experience watching you and Amy in Oklahoma, like huge dance sequences, there's so many different things that are.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? like break it down. Like what is it? I mean, how does it even start? I don't know. Like,
well, so I'll first say that the dream. So Oklahoma was it's iconic because it was the first use of storytelling in dance. Right, Agnes DeMille choreographed the original production of Oklahoma back in 1959, I believe, and at the end of Act 1, there's this prolonged, this extensive ballet, right? It's called the Dream Ballet. And the reason it's in the story was to allow the character of Laurie, or allow the audience to see the turmoil that Laurie is going through, right? It's something that she can't fully express to other people. Like, she tries to confide in Ado Annie, but ultimately she doesn't have the right people around her at the right time to really say, like, I'm struggling with this. And at that time in our culture in America, like, it wasn't something that maybe she felt confident to be able to talk about, right? It was very much, a male-dominated society.
Well, it's basically like she's committed to one person, but like there's another person, like this is the better match.
Yeah, she clearly loves Curly. There's a connection there, but he's a cowboy. He's aloof. He's not stable. And on the farm is this farmhand named Judd who is menacing and creepy and just you don't feel right when you're around him, kind of thing. You know that there's something off there that's scary, and that's written that way on purpose. Yeah. But he's stable. Right. And he feels like he has the right to be with Laurie. And so that's part of that, what I was saying, that male-dominated sort of cultural society thing where, he felt like, he in the show, he feels very dominant and, controlling of Laurie. Yeah. But Laurie knows that she doesn't want to be with him. She would rather be with Curly, but Curly there's question marks there. She doesn't know, he can be a ladies' man. Is this really the guy for me? And all that kind of stuff. So at the end of Act 1, she takes this, elixir that's supposed to help make her decisions or make help her mind find, the right path or whatever. And so the elixir, and this is great storytelling on Rodgers and Hammerstein's part. The elixir, you learn in the scenes before that it will basically like put her to sleep, and then in her dreams she'll find the way to proceed. So you see Laurie take the elixir, and then she falls asleep, and then this huge dream ballet happens. Yeah. So to go back to your original question of how it happens, I'll say that the dream ballet in particular, we had an assistant choreographer, Carrie White, who is absolutely phenomenal. She's a local dancer here in town and a choreographer and teacher. She was wonderful, and her strength is ballet. Yeah. And so I definitely, we had worked with Carrie last year in our production of Music Man. And so I knew Carrie well, and I knew that she's the right person to bring on board with this. And so I asked Carrie early on, I said, hey, can you focus on some of the more ballet moments of the Dream Ballet? I'll focus on kind of the cowboy moments and the things that I feel like I can do well. But, part of being, I guess, a good leader is understanding, like, where you need help, right? And understanding, like, who, like my wife always says, like, you got to have the right people in the right seats on the bus, right? Yeah. Everybody's on the bus moving forward, but you got to be in the right seat. So putting Carrie in that right seat and asking her early on, like, can you help with this ballet choreography? She was over the moon. She was like, yes, of course. And so we worked well together, her and I. But to go back even farther, I had to go to, my process really started with Renee, the director. So as a choreographer, I always, if I'm not directing the show, then I usually go to the director with the script, and I say, okay, here's this dance break. Here's this moment of choreography, right, of movement. What's the story you want to tell, right? Mm-hmm. And some directors will say, well, whatever you want, right? But I feel like it's my job as a choreographer to make sure I'm allowing the director's vision to be the through line, because it's going to be obvious if the director has a certain way of storytelling, and all of a sudden the choreographer comes in and like makes a left turn and does something completely different. You know, it's going to feel weird for the audience. So we want the audience to really feel like it's a seamless transition from the director's blocking to the choreographer's choreography. So that's where I started. Renee and I sat down with the music, with the score, and just detailed through. Okay, in this moment, these girls will, some group of girls will come out and dance with Lori. In this moment, these guys come out. In this moment is where the wedding happens. So it's really listening to the music and following along with what is the music, because ultimately, we can storytell as much as we want, but what they're dancing to is laid down. Like, we can't change that, right?
Yeah.
So we have to listen to the music and let that influence let it influence those aspects of the story.
Yeah.
Right?
So if there's like a it's like slow moving music, and all of a sudden like cowboys coming out doing like the Cotton Eye Joe, like that. Okay, that's not.
Yeah.
That's
so
not working.
and so that's exactly right. There's in the score, in the music, you hear these transitions where it's like, oh, that's the cowboy theme again. Mm-hmm. We need to bring the cowboys back out.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that was really where I started. I sat down with Renee, figured out what are the elements of storytelling that we want throughout the piece. Then Carrie and I sat down and established, okay, Carrie, you take, measure 32 through 65. I'll take 66 through 85, and then we'll work together on this next section. And so then she went off and worked on her own. I worked on my own. We then came together and sort of showed each other, like, hey, these are my thoughts. Great. And then we adjusted and adapted, and then eventually came to what you saw on stage.
Yeah. I just wondered too, like, even some of the logistics of like, okay, I'm having the cowboys dance, and then they're gonna be on this side of the stage, and then all of a sudden, like, she's like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna bring in two of them, and they're gonna be over here. Wait a second, they're over there, they're over here.
Oh yeah.
I mean, is there some of that like that's happening? Like,
tracking is one of the most challenging things as a director. And for sure as a choreographer as well. So on that note, a lot of times what I'll do after I talk to the choreographer, or after I talk to the director and understand what's the storytelling they want, right? I'll go and work on steps. I'll work on like concept, and like, in dance we have things called motifs and themes, right? So, for instance, a motif for a cowboy might be standing kind of bow-legged with your hands on your sort of belts and like big, wide steps, right? That's like a motif, right? And so we can vary that in different ways in part of the choreography and make it move, make it jump, or whatever. So I'll go and work on that stuff. But then before I put it on the actual dancers, I then go back to the director and I say, okay, I need to know where, like, when this dance moment happens, where are the actors on stage? Right? Because ultimately, like you said, if I've got somebody entering from stage left, but the director has them exiting last time on stage right, we then need to ask ourselves, is there time for them to go around, right? Or if not, I need to change. One of us needs to give, and sort of work together. So there's a lot of
just
that.
tell the person, like, figure it out.
Good luck. Teleport. Yeah. There's a lot of running backstage for sure. But that's a great point. And when I do direct and choreograph, that's something that I am taking into account. This past summer, I was able to direct and choreograph an equity production, a full, professional production back in Pittsburgh of a newer show called Bandstand. And it was a great success, but it was a really challenging piece, but it has such great heart. It's a story about these World War II veterans that are kind of trying to find their way back into society, and they're musicians, so they create a band to enter this like national competition, or like creating the next big song, and it's a really powerful story. But as a director and choreographer for that, I knew early on, like, we have a really challenging theater that we were in. So crossing from stage right to stage left meant going back through like a loading dock area and all the way back around. I mean, it was like really challenging.
Yeah.
So
nobody locked this door.
Yeah, exactly. And so I knew early on, like, I've got to really be specific on who's exiting where, who's entering where. But also with that show in particular, we didn't want crew members to come out and be moving scenery back and forth. So I had to choreograph really all of the set changes, So it's like, okay, you're going to bring this table on, but as you bring it on, you're going to lift it over your head. You're going to spin. You're going to turn. You're going to, So it's like,
make it part of the show.
Make it part of the show. Yeah.
So I'm just, and this just came into my head. So like, I'm curious, when you choreograph, you know how like sometimes directors will make a nod to like a movie or something like that. They'll take
gosh.
I mean, like I'm just thinking of like Footloose, right? Like if you had like one of your characters like in a like scene, like all of a sudden do like the Kevin Bacon and like strut. Like if you ever thrown in something like that,
I do that all the time.
Oh, that's awesome!
It's so funny you mentioned that because literally last night
nice.
in Cinderella rehearsal.
Okay.
So we all know Cinderella from the original Disney movie. Well, this version is the Rodgers and Hammerstein version, which was actually updated in 2012. So the story is still roughly the same.
Yeah.
But the script feels more current. Right?
Okay.
Well, there was a moment last night where I was staging the ending of the show where they're singing this, it's not a Disney song because, Roger Hammerstein couldn't use any of the original Disney stuff. But I said, hey, guys, what I want you to do right now, I said the whole cast, everybody look out towards the audience to your right, okay? And when you say this, when you sing this word true, all right, they're singing true for like 8 counts, I want your eyes to go from stage right up over the audience and then down towards stage left, out towards the audience. And they were like, why? I'd say, because for me, that is that Disney star going over the castle. Uh-huh. And they all were like, oh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, Joe. And they were like, I got chills. And so that to me is like those little nuggets, those little Easter eggs that the audience probably would never know, but telling the cast that, that's something for their brains, right? Like we're watching that star go up over, the castle at Disney World.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So yes, I do try to throw in little nuggets. Yeah.
So, this is awesome. So this is exactly what I want. So sometimes I see teaching as helping. I'm laughing because I said this question to your wife, and I delivered it in like kind of a Chris Farley like interviewing Paul McCartney sort of way. Like, so I'll try not to do that this time. All right. So sometimes I see teaching as helping students take on an identity. So being a doer of mathematics, or example of me being a mayor and my students as members of a city council, which I did. I acted like this Mayor Don Me.
Yeah, there we go.
And like I'd be in front of like acting. I was myself being the teacher, and I'd all of a sudden have a coughing fit, and I'd go out into the hallway, and I'd put on fake glasses because I didn't have glasses at the time. I put on a suit coat, and then I had a little tape player with "Hail to the Chief" on it. Come in and like, all right, and they, oh my gosh, they loved it. They loved it, and we had like, is the mayor coming in? And just like these little things. That, anyway, so taking on identities. So how do you help your students or those you direct to embody another identity? So I mean, like even like what you just example of like the magic of what we're doing. Yeah. Like, hey, let's tap into that Disney sort of feeling. But like, how do you do that?
Well, so first of all, you and I are very similar, my friend. In my theater dance classes, we have a lot of times I'll do audition Fridays, and I tell them at the very beginning of the semester, I'm like, okay, right now I'm Joe, I'm your instructor. I'm going to teach you this combo, and as a musical theater person, you're constantly going to new auditions and you're picking up choreography very quickly. Right? And you have to like perform that choreography within like 15, 20 minutes. So there's something that you have to like train the brain to be able to learn something that quickly to be able to then perform it and execute it at a high level. Because if you can't master that, you may not work in the business. I mean, it's just the reality of what you have to be able to do.
So you're getting a legitimate. This is legitimate skill stuff. If you're going to do this, this is you got to be able to. All right, awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. So that
my book over there on communities of practice would call that legitimate peripheral participation.
Ooh, I like
so there you go.
Very
little fancy stuff for you.
So so in our theater dance classes, we're learning like routines and stuff that we'll take weeks to work on. Like right now we're doing a Fosse routine with hats, and the kids are loving it. But on Fridays sometimes, and I do this. I don't always put it in the syllabus because I want it to surprise them.
There we go.
And so sometimes on Fridays I'll come in and I've told them this early on. I'm like, later in the semester, I'm not going to be Joe. I'm going to be, Giuseppe, Luigi, whatever, from the Tupelo Community Theater production of War Paint, and I'm going to lead you through an audition because they need to understand that, like, they know me, and I'm fun, and I'm gonna be patient with them. But they're gonna get into a room sometimes of really hard nosed, like old school choreographers that are gonna be like, "Here it is, 5, 6, 7, 8, go!" And I want them to experience that. I want them to experience that heart racing, like, oh my gosh moment, right? So I do that. I sometimes they'll come in for the beginning of class, and we'll do our like 10-minute physical warm up. I'm like, great, are you guys all warm? They're like, yeah. What are we doing today? And I'm like, you're going out of the room. I'm shutting the door. When I open it, you're coming in to audition for a show you don't know. You don't know what it is. And they're like, and I literally take on a persona.
Yeah.
And I will be a completely different character, and I will lead them through some sort of audition, right? And sometimes I'm nice. Sometimes I'm like happy, fields of flowers and rainbows. But then sometimes I'm mean and not mean, but I'm more strict and I'm more rigid.
Yeah.
And it's very fast paced because I need them to understand that that's what they'll experience.
Like that's a 45-degree angle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, not a 27 degree. I want 27.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, those hands got to be splayed out. No fist. Yeah. And so that's a little bit of what I do, similar to your mayor thing. What was the initial question?
Like helping them take on an identity. I mean, so now you're helping them take on an identity of someone trying out for a show.
Yes, yeah. So in my classes, it's probably like that's me doing that to give them that kind of real world experience.
Them too. They're taking an identity of, hey, I'm trying out for a show.
Absolutely.
Right?
I'm sorry. Yeah. No, it's a great point. I think that it's even more so for them when they're doing our shows, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to embody a different character. They have to embody somebody that's different from them.
Yeah.
And that's what we do, right? For our as actors. And here in the Department of Theater and Film, that's what we're training our graduates to do, right? Is to be able to open up, I was going to say open up the trade papers, but now go online, see an audition that they feel that they're right for, and then submit for it, go in and nail that character, right? And then when we cast and when we do our shows here locally, right, we're asking them to be a character, right? To embody something and to do it honestly and truthfully. I think that's, in our performance faculty here on campus, that's one of the things we talk about a lot is honesty in acting, right? Because we can tell if somebody's trying to play a character, but they're not really in it, they're not being completely honest, it's going to feel fake. It's going to feel false, right? It's going to feel like they're putting on a character as opposed to they are that character. They are embodying it. They are like every ounce of their being is just committed to that character. Yeah. When you see it, you're like, yes, you know. And I'm sure there's like great movies where you watch, Tom Hanks or John Malkovich. I don't know why he came to mind, but anyway, like these amazing actors that Meryl Streep, who you just are like, yes, you believe them in every role they do, and as varied and as different as all those characters are that they play, you believe them because they are tapping into that honest and truthful responses to the character, right? And truthful way of playing the characters. So that's what we're trying to get our actors to understand, our students to understand, is if you can do that and you can consistently bring that level of creativity and truthfulness to your auditions and to the characters that you play, then you're going to be set.
Yeah. Well, okay, so playing off of that, sometimes I'm like, I want my teachers sometimes are acting like teachers.
Yeah.
They're not being the teachers that they were meant to be.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm still taking on the identity, but it's like my version of the identity. And so is that what you're talking about? Is like I'm pretending to be this person versus I am this person as me.
So it's so funny you say that because there are days where I'm the teacher in the class and I don't feel like I'm Joe. I feel like I'm putting on, I'm acting. I mean, I'll be honest, my first few years of teaching back in Pittsburgh, I was playing the best role of my life. I mean, I was acting my tail off because at that time, it was still so new to me, you know? I didn't have educational training.
Right.
I just had theater training. And so I knew what I wanted to give to my students, but I didn't have like classroom management skills. I didn't have like how to deal with different students and different learning environments. I had to figure all that out on my own, and so I did feel like my first few years was like playing the biggest role of my life, right? Just because also as you know, when you're in front of students, especially younger students, like middle schoolers, they see right through you.
Yeah.
You know, they can look at you and know if you know what you're talking about or not. And so that was really kind of terrifying in moments, right? Where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be exposed. I'm going to be exposed as a fraud, you know? And so it's so funny that you mentioned that because, I do feel like as an educator, I am sometimes taking on the role of the teacher, you know?
Right.
But because of my acting training, hopefully I do it well. So I'm sure it's the same way with you with your students, right?
Yeah.
Like trying to get them to understand that, like, they may be up in front of a class thinking about Mr. Amadon and all these other professors that they've had at school.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they've got to find what works for them.
Right.
They've got to find their voice and their style.
Yeah.
Because I think the ones that find their own personal style and they can be comfortable in being who they are, then their teaching is just going to open up from there, right? And they're not worried about trying to replicate or copycat some version of teaching that they saw beforehand.
Right.
They're able to really like dig in and say, this is who I am as an educator. This is what I bring to my classroom, to my lessons. Well,
I think it's just the confidence because I mean, even too, like people are taking on roles that they've seen other people, a lot of times famously, like take on, and it's like, well, who am I? So there has to be a level of confidence, maybe a little even overconfidence too. But even to say like, okay, here's how I would do it, and so like that's just an interesting balance of taking that on.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that because the level of confidence and stuff that it takes to be an actor is it has to be great, right? Some actors are notoriously known for being kind of jerks and being self-centered narcissist, if you will, and part of that, some people are already had that maybe innate in them. Some of them put up that wall so that they can focus on their career. They can focus on what they need to do as an actor, because with the culture and society and social media the way it is, if I'm worried about every little thing that somebody's saying about me, it's gonna make me question my choices as an actor, right? So if we look at that in the sense of education, if I can get to, as an educator, if I can get to a point where I am confident and I know that I am the right person to stand in front of this class and deliver this material, then it doesn't matter what, if a kid rolls their eyes or snarks or whatever, like I'm the leader of this lesson. I'm the leader of this classroom. I have confidence to move forward. So finding that, having especially I'm sure early teachers, right? Students that are learning how to do this. I'm sure that's probably terrifying to them, right? And I think you're right. I think it takes a certain level of confidence that now the question becomes, well, how do they gain that confidence? How do they build that level of confidence? And I guess it's through training. It's through practice. Right.
Well, and also there's something with the enthusiasm. So like when you were talking earlier about your story about not knowing the actual terminology, and like a student contributes it, you then provide an environment for the student to feel safe enough to contribute the terminology and be like, hey, it's excited. We all just learned something today. This is great. Versus like I thinking about my early teaching, and I think one of the first episodes of this podcast I talked about it. It was I solved a problem. It was like a slope problem, and I solved it the way in our text, and I was like up on being that, and this is going to my next question about being a sage on the stage, and like solved it, and like, hey, this is how you do it, and the kid like raised their hand and be like, I did it with tables. I didn't do it with the symbols. Like, what are you talking about? And they came up and they did it, and it was like, that's brilliant. And it's like the enthusiasm and excitement that I had was like, hey, now this is a great environment. This is not like, oh, you didn't do it my way. Now you're in trouble. Versus like, no, hey, this is great. Now we're all better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you say that too, because, my little example of, being an educator and being like command of the room, like that was definitely something that I felt when I was teaching, elementary and middle school students. Once I started teaching more high school and college students, then I felt like trying to find ways to give them more agency and having ways for them to teach lessons, to share their experiences and things. I thought that I've really tried to incorporate that more.
Nice. So I talk about being during my career, a lot of people talk about being on the stage, but I was just talking about. Yeah. But more and more, I find my best teaching is when I'm a guide on the side, when I'm creating environments for good stuff to happen. And interesting that those are kind of both related to theater. And then you do both at the same time. Yeah. So like being in the performance, but then also choreographing. Yeah. So again, like balancing that.
So it's funny you say that, because I'm like literally when we finish the podcast today, I'm heading back over to the dance studio, and like right now, currently in the dance studio is a class that Lydia Foster teaches. Lydia, who played Dream Lori.
Okay.
She was in Oklahoma as the amazing dancer. Yeah. Uh-huh. So she's our ballet teacher on campus, and because, you know, again, I hope being very humble, I know that I'm not the strongest at ballet. I've been taking her ballet class every Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30. I'm in there with everybody else, and I've got my tights on, and I'm ready to go. You know, and I'm like trying to walk the walk, right? You know, but then that class finishes 15 minutes later, and that's like a 100 level class, right? Yeah. 15 minutes later, dance composition comes in, and it's a 400 level class. So I go from being the student in this class where I'm still actively learning, and I am sweating and I'm sore. I mean, it's like, it's a lot of work. And then these next group of students come in who are at a higher level. They've already taken that ballet 1, 2, 3. They've taken theater dance and tap and jazz. Now they're at a level where they're composing, right? And so that's where I get to be that sage, if you will, or what's the
guide on the side.
Guide on the side. Yeah, I love that term. So I'm in the wings of this, you know, and I'm there to guide them as they're creating their choreography. Yeah. So that course is new this year. It's new for me to teach. It's been at the university for years, but in that course, it's really these people that have come in varying levels of dance training. Some of them have been dancing since they were 3 or 4. We've got a kid in our theater department, though, who just started dancing 2 years ago as a freshman, just like I did. Yeah. And he's in that dance composition class. So what he creates is completely different than the other students that have had like real fundamental training. Yeah. You know, his pieces tend to be more raw and you know, like they focus on like emotion as opposed to like, look at me doing this beautiful jump and this beautiful turn. Right. But one of the things that a lot of our units in that dance composition class is, we talk about what is our story that we're trying to tell, right? Yeah. Let's pick a story, and then let's find music that accompanies it, or let's not. Like there's some units where we've said like, you don't get music. Yeah. You have to figure it out. One of our last units that we did, I was really excited about, took the students over to the University Museum here on campus. And I said, okay, we're going to tour for class today, we're going to tour the museum, and I want you to find a piece of artwork that speaks to you. And they all pick these very different pieces. One girl, there's a statue in the back of the back section of the museum, in like the Greek and Roman section, that this clearly, it's maybe like a 2.5 foot tall statue of a woman who the head has been broken off, and like the foot is broken off. And this student just stood there staring at this statue, and she was like, I'm enthralled by this. She's like, there's a story here. Yeah. Like, yes. Now let's take that idea that you have in your head and let's go put it to movement. So the next day in class, she was in class and she was creating this amazing choreography of this who was this woman that the statue was based on, right? There's another student, the guy that I was talking about, he was fascinated by this pencil drawing sort of sketch of like this rat, and the rat kind of looked like Templeton from the Charlotte's Web. It was like this overgrown like fat rat, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And he did this really amazing like raw choreography to that, you know? And so allowing them that space, right, and giving them the parameters. Okay, you're going to pick a piece of artwork. It's going to be whatever music you want. It has to have these elements. Like, now go, and just giving them the space and the time to create. That's sort of what that class is. I love that.
Yeah. So we went to Italy this past summer. And saw famous sculpture, the boxer.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and like sitting there and like he's like basically on a stool, and it's like you could tell he's been hit. You could see the damage that had already been inflicted, but he's looking up, like I'm about to go out again. And it's like like I could just imagine like, okay, what kind of music would go along with that?
Right.
Like, it's like kind of lumbering, like there's even an injury, kind of like what does that look like in movement? Like that could be kind of cool.
Yeah, one of our students was really drawn to this piece of art that was like the Sphinx head that was like on the ground for some. It wasn't like up in the sky, like at the top. It was like on the ground, but then there was this figure, this like man, like almost like groveling or like praying at the base of this Sphinx head. And so that was her motivation. And she did this gorgeous choreography, like where it was all like on the ground, and then she would pull herself up to standing and then like fall back down because she didn't. It was really gorgeous. It was cool. Yeah.
Nice. So I want to honor your time. Don't want you to be late for your class. So what's the best thing you've learned lately to help you teach better? It could be something you already mentioned, but is there anything else that you'd like to put out there?
Best thing I've learned lately? Well, not like I've learned this lately, but the quote that my wife says to me all the time that I have to take into not only just education, but just as a human being, is the more you do, the less you do well. And I feel like I'm now saying that to so many people that I constantly give her credit for it, but I may be more known for it these days. I'm a yes man, you know, and so I'm always saying yes to things. This year, I've taken on two more not admin, but two more like substantial roles in our theater department, and it's come with a lot of extra work, you know. And so for me, what I've found is I have to really balance all of that admin and all of that, you know, out of the classroom stuff with making sure I'm prepared for my classes, you know, and because it's not fair to the students for me to walk in unprepared and say, oh, sorry, guys, I was in all these meetings and everything else, right? So making sure that even though I've taken on these added things, these extra things, you know, making sure that I'm still doing my job to the best of my ability, because you know I'm teaching, like I said, 3 classes, but then I also am in rehearsals every night, right? Choreographing, and so I need to always make sure that I'm taking care of myself, and that I'm honoring my initial responsibility, which is to these students, because a lot of times some of the outside stuff that you're asked to do, it's not maybe directly related to the students. It doesn't directly benefit the students, even though, you know, it does come back around to them. But I never want to sacrifice their experience, because that's not fair to them. You know?
Absolutely. We've been adding an additional thing that you didn't get this advance. So I've been got my record player up there.
Nice.
So albums.
Ooh.
If you had to name an album that just comes to mind, like what would be one that you're like, you know what, just playing that, if it was a CD or a tape back in the day, from end to end.
Yeah.
Anything pop to mind?
Oh my gosh!
I know I'm throwing you completely.
That's fine. I don't remember names of albums, unfortunately. There's 3 that like come to mind. So I'm from Atlanta. You know, grew up in the '90s, and Outkast was my jam. Yeah. And so you know. AT-Aliens is their album, late 90s, that, you know, listened to, you know, over and over.
Was a place they recorded called like the Underground? It was like under the house?
Exactly. Yeah, and so huge Outkast fan. So, yeah, a lot of their work, Speakerbox, and, you know, some of the stuff later as well. But then Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm forgetting the name of the album, but man, I had it actually when I was in school here. I had a Jeep Wrangler, and I loved just take the top down and just blast music around town.
Like, was it Californication by chance?
Yes, it was Californication. Okay. Thank you.
I love that
album.
That one starts off with like, you know,
yes. Oh my gosh, so that one is
that'll be on the album. That might be this next one.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, Californication. I vivid memories of like driving around not only Oxford, but when I was in school here, I would go and do summer stock out in Durango, Colorado, and I drove my Jeep out to Durango, and I just remember driving around Durango and through the mountains,
there you go,
top down, blasting Californication.
Nice,
it was great.
Oh, very good. And then finally, I know we have a show coming up. So
absolutely,
let's put the information out there.
Let's pitch it. So, 2 weeks from tomorrow, actually, we open Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. So the official dates are November the 15th through the 17th. So that's a Friday night, and then there's 2 shows on Saturday the 16th, and 1 show on, or there's a matinee on November the 17th, that Sunday.
Maybe at the Ford Center, right?
At the Ford Center, yeah.
And we'll put links in the show notes to it.
Thank you. Yeah, you can go to the Ford Center box office, get tickets. I do know that Sunday is already sold out, apparently.
Very good.
Friday night is close to selling out. And as I'm saying that, I need to go get my tickets. But there's plenty of room on Saturday, so please, if you want to come see Cinderella, come and see it on Saturday. That'd be great.
Perfect. Anything else you want to promote?
No, you guys are great. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
All right, there's my conversation with Joe Jackson. Now we get to talk about the album of the episode. And I think, just a quick reminder, the purpose of talking about the album of the episode is to provide more context, to build this relationship between you and I, the podcaster and the listener. And also it's just an excuse for me to get to talk about music. And actually, really, there's a slight delay between when Joe and I recorded and when I'm putting this episode out and recording this portion of the podcast, because I got a chance to actually order the album Californication by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which was mentioned in the podcast episode. And I've been looking for this album for a while, and sometimes you just need a little bit of nudge to just go get it. And found it and just excited for it. So when I think about this album, it's one of those, like, it's Friday, you're done with the weekend, or you're ready for the weekend, and you don't want to play Loverboy working for the weekend. Or another one I like to play is Kickstart My Heart by Motley Crue. That's another one. Dr. Feelgood album. That's maybe a future album of the episode. Got to get it first. But this one is when you put this album on and Around the World comes on, and it's just Anthony Kiedis starts screaming at the beginning. It is something, and Joe talked about it in the podcast episode about having his Jeep, the top down, and playing this album. I can see it. I know that I had whatever I was driving at the time. 2000 probably would have been a GMC Sonoma pickup truck. Probably would have had the CD player rocking, and Around the World was on it. Around the World, Parallel Universe, Scar Tissue, Other Side. Those first four songs were unparalleled. Like it was a set, and when I listened to them, it was always those four going on. And what was interesting is, and again, thinking about teaching better, I saw, and maybe again, the algorithm heard me talking about it, or heard Joe and I talking about this album, or knew that I was trying to buy it. And through the algorithm, this little clip from Rick Rubin popped up, and it was about him talking about this album. And so, because this is I believe, an American recording. It was produced by Rick Rubin. And they were talking about this album and talking about, I think it was Scar Tissue or Other Side, one of those two, where Anthony Kiedis had words but no music. Yeah, he had like a poem he had written. And actually, take that back. It was for Under the Bridge. Go Under the Bridge. So it was an album beforehand. So, and actually that's important because I think that was the pivot point. So Rick Rubin is producing, what is that, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, that album. And Anthony Kiedis has the words for Under the Bridge, which is their famous Under the Bridge Downtown. It's like, it starts off with that guitar strum. And guitarist comes up with the guitar lick to go along with it. And that song which Anthony Kiedis didn't want to be a Red Hot Chili Pepper song because it didn't sound like a Red Hot Chili Pepper song, which it didn't, because Red Hot Chili Pepper was kind of rap and funk kind of mixed up together. But Rick Rubin pushed them and be like, well, why can't this be a Chili Pepper song? And that kind of goes into my thinking about teaching, where I want my teachers to be the best version of a teacher that they were meant to be. And sometimes that looks different from what the idea of what they think a teacher should be. Just like it seemed like Rick Rubin pushed the Red Hot Chili Peppers, pushed Anthony Kiedis, and pushed everyone in the band to think outside of what the Chili Peppers could be, right? And that they could have this soft sound, for Under the Bridge. And so when it gets to Californication, the album that I love, yes, Around the World has a definite pre Blood Sugar Sex Magic, pre-Under the Bridge sound to a Red Hot Chili Peppers. But when you get into Scar Tissue and Other Side, they're different, right? And I love those. It's like one of those things where it's like that Scar Tissue and Other Side, those songs like that I love, like might not have come to be if Rick Rubin didn't do a nudge and be like, Chili Peppers could be this, right? This is obviously within you to do this kind of, poetry and thoughtfulness and everything. And so, like, why can't that be a part of how you all communicate to the world through your music? And I'm so glad they did, because this is one of my favorite albums. It's one of the best starts to an album, and I love it. And so, and if you've never heard it, just go to, and we'll put a link in the show notes to it. Just go from beginning to end. Start with Around the World, Parallel Universe, Scar Tissue, Other Side, and then it goes Get on Top, Californication, and goes from there. But I know that from the beginning of the album is what I think I wore out. I wore out that part of the CD. And so, sometimes I talk about playing from front to back, and I will admit I don't play this one but now I'm looking forward to it because now I got the album. All right, so that's the album of the episode. And again, just an opportunity to talk a little bit more about music, something I really know I love, and also, develop this relationship between us. All right, so that's about it for this episode of Amazon Planet. Show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 117. For those of you looking for ways to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode, which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download containing teaching resources and updates from Amazon Planet. Probably going to have a little opportunity if you're looking for a little Amazon Planet swag, free swag. Go ahead and sign up for that download. It's next one coming out is going to have an opportunity for you to share something with me, and I'll share something with you. So you can also submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. In addition, I'm always looking for opportunities to work with those who are looking to lead people to love others through teaching. If you have an event or opportunity to share, you can either send an email to joel@amazonplanet.com or head to amazonplanet.com/about to fill out the request to call form. All right, so thank you for spending time on Abaddon Planet. Thank you to Joe Jackson for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.